Thank you, Bethany. And Laura, your turn.
Thank you, Kathy. Happy birthday to the birthday guy. Sorry, I can't remember your name. Pardon? Oh, Roger. I was going to call him Joel.
Roger Joel.
For whatever reason, I thought his name was Joel. Thank you all so much for coming. I am Laura George. I am Indigenous. For those who are Guyanese and you were taught in school, you would know that out of the 9 groups there, I am Akawai. We call ourselves Kapong. I am from the Upper Mazaruni Region 7. So how did I end up here? In my prior work, I was an advocate for the rights of Indigenous peoples in civil society, working with a group called that is known as the Amerindian Peoples Association, and for at least 14 years with the APA, I worked calling for inclusion of Indigenous peoples, Indigenous leadership in decision making at a national, international level, and at community levels. I represented the organization at several national committees, working groups, advocating for Indigenous peoples' rights protections and everything Indigenous in the national committees, boards, whether it was climate change, whether it was on forest governance and any other governance that spoke to Indigenous peoples. For at least, I would say, 14 years, I realized at the end of 14 years that it didn't matter how much I spoke from the spot in civil society. If we have policymakers, politicians who don't believe in rights and justice, who don't believe in the protection of Indigenous people's rights, I would be forever speaking and exhausting myself, getting disillusioned and all of that. Until one day, someone who is not very strange to us, to me at all, Nigel Hughes, reached out on a message with a link to a news article that he'd been nominated to run for leadership of the Alliance for Change. But prior to that, I'd known Nigel as a friend to the Akawaios, the Kapong, and the Arakunas of the Upper Mazaruni, because for at least 24 years, he'd been 26 years, he'd been a lawyer for our peoples, litigating and defending a court matter for land rights protections. And as a lawyer, he stood by us when everyone else were so scared to stand by Indigenous people's rights protections, especially when it comes to land rights. Because land rights all over the world, I guess, is a very sensitive matter. It's political, it's technical. But Nigel Hughes stood by and for a long, long time worked to represent us on a pro bono case, not only for the Akawais and the Arakunas, but for other Indigenous persons and village councils. So, for those who know me, really, the years of work I've done as an advocate for Indigenous people's rights, may wonder how suddenly that I was finding myself in this political field. But as I said, that upon realizing that it doesn't matter what I say and what I represent to the best of my ability, to the best of representations and the experience and the language that I've received, as long as we have politicians who are not interested, who don't respect the rights of Indigenous people, then I'd be there and no policy change would ever come around for Indigenous peoples. So when Nigel reached out and said, well, this is what I'm inviting you about, I don't think it was very challenging to me to make such a decision. Nigel sometimes have asked, so was it, how did you decide how did you find it, that you can come across to be here? Then I said to him it was not a challenge. To a large extent because, number one, I've known Nigel so long to represent and stand by our people. I believe in his commitment, and because of my commitment to rights and justice, not only is doing the best for indigenous peoples. It's an administration where the citizens of Guyana are made to feel that they're being done a favor by the political administration with our own resources. So indigenous peoples who have little access to information, real-time, independent information, are on the brunt of receiving propaganda. Yesterday was Mental Health Day. And Beverly and I were listening to the president make that address to the nation. But as the leader of Alliance for Change, Mr. Nigel says today that it was the launch of a political campaign on the part of where a president launches a campaign in the National Assembly and announces that there is a 200,000 Guyana dollars one-off cash grant, which is the hottest debate in Guyana right now, because nobody knows under what statutory framework or regulations or mechanism that ensures that it's transparent, that it's accountable, and as I said, for indigenous peoples who have their own elected governance in the communities, are never involved in decision making, are never involved or included in the implementation of the different programs, different projects, or different decisions of the government. And in the end, you have indigenous peoples being called to make a decision when it's election time. So you have indigenous peoples now being baited with a $200,000 one-off cash grant. Sometimes to many families it may look like a lot, because the need is immediate. The need is so critical that this looks like a lot. That it takes away the focus of indigenous peoples, for example, of us being able to know that we have the power to call on the administration or the government to say, hey, you're saying this, but you took a decision without consulting with us. It was a decision, I think, that was made without even consulting or engaging with the opposition and the members of parliament. Indigenous peoples who make up a certain voter group are faced with, okay, here comes Alliance for Change. That our people may say, oh, but they don't have monies to give us $200,000 for a household, because they do not understand, and this is where voter education, the lack of voter education, they do not understand, and we do not, as indigenous peoples, do not understand that this actually is our own resources. And what the administration has done is to make a decision, administrative decision, to do this, and it's not a favor that they're giving us out of their political party pockets. So that is a disadvantage that indigenous peoples have in Guyana. When Nigel invited me to say, Laura, we would like your help to help us develop a plan and policy of the Alliance for Change to make sure that we do not do like the current administration, for example, where they go to international forums, whether it's in relation to climate change, protection and conservation programs, but these decisions made without consulting indigenous peoples who live in the hinterland of Guyana. Our way of life has protected forests, ecosystems. Guyana is one of the most beautiful countries full of nature. But indigenous peoples are the last on the list of recognition and respect for the ones having been the protecting these ecosystems in Guyana. And they're last on the list of inclusion in any decision making. And it is an injustice to indigenous peoples. So why am I here? It's to ensure that any policy decision making and supporting legislation is reformed to ensure that indigenous peoples are included in decision making. Indigenous peoples are included on the way forward on what we would like to see as Guyana being the country that it should be, not only for indigenous peoples, but for all the world. I think Kathy and Beverly mentioned or said to you, our thoughts and prayers and our good wishes in recovery from the most recent hurricane and the ones before. So there is global warming. The government in Guyana would be in Colombia on its climate change, on its conference of parties, on the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. They're quickly pushing to ensure that 30% of Guyana's ocean and terrestrial lands are considered or declared protected areas. But these lands are the lands of indigenous peoples that we have protected from time immemorial. In my language, we call it Jilbiya Chikuri, from time immemorial. These are still to get legal recognition and protection. In November, December, Guyana is going to continue promoting itself as the lead on climate change and fighting global warming again, where they have taken a decision to say all the forests that are in Guyana can be traded for carbon offsets. And they have taken a decision that this is the percentage that indigenous communities will receive without any consultation, without any consent of indigenous peoples. The leadership we have in Guyana is one who are so fearful to speak independently, to advocate for the rights, for our right to be heard, for our right to give or withhold our consent is respected. What I push for today and what I believe in is that with the leadership of Nigel Hughes and the Alliance for Change, it's like I cannot wait for next year's elections. I truly, truly cannot wait for next year's elections. And whilst there are persons and community leaders who are not vocal on social media, they are there because they believe in the Alliance for Change. They believe in Mr. Nigel Hughes, and that is made because of the work that I have done with the communities. Even in civil society is advocating, as I said, for the rights of indigenous peoples, because I have ensured that whatever advocacy I represent and am vocal about is based on facts. And Nigel knows that. And so, being here and to help each other and lead the way for Guyana, I truly want to repeat what Beverly was saying, is that I hope that you will spread the word, and that many of you, or all of you, will find your way to Guyana to ensure that your vote is counted. And I thank you tonight.
Thank you, Laura.